Ladies and gentlemen, it is an absolute honour for me to introduce to you Dr. Nathan Newman. He's the National Manager, Regulatory Operations at AUSTRAC. Nathan is responsible for, he leads the regulatory compliance, investigations and industry education functions, including AUSTRAC's efforts to monitor and support compliance by industry in their obligations under the AML-CTF Act 2006. Formerly, Nathan was the AUSTRAC Chief of Staff, where he managed the agency's strategic communications and parliamentary and planning teams. Nathan has worked across the Australian law enforcement and national security community for more than a decade. Nathan was the director of the then Australian Crime Commission's strategy and policy team, where he contributed to whole-of-government policy and legislative reforms. He also previously worked with industry to build the resilience of the critical infrastructure sector of the Attorney General's Department and supported the Australian government's response to national security threats as part of his work with the Defence Intelligence Organisation. Nathan attained a doctorate in philosophy following studies to develop a next-generation sensor for wastewater analysis. We are absolutely privileged to have Nathan with us. Admittedly, he won't be here in person, but I now invite Nathan to address the audience. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all. And look, can I say I am sorely disappointed not to be there in person. Only yesterday did I cancel my trip. Unfortunately, it's the situation where you don't know if you can get back into your own state or whether you'll need to be isolating for 2 weeks or not. So I truly am disappointed to not be there in person, and can only hope that there'll be next time that I'll be able to attend. Again, thank you all for the introduction, and thank you, Steve, as well. Certainly there's some things that resonated with me, and hopefully I can draw some of this out today as part of my presentation. I have got a lot to go through, so hopefully we get through it all. The timer is ticking away in the corner of my eye, so hopefully we can get through it all. I might just have to rush through some of it. So ultimately going to provide a presentation that will give you some insights from a regulator perspective on the Australian AML environment. So I will hope to provide you with some information that perhaps you haven't seen or heard of before, some stuff hopefully you're familiar with, and then I'll pepper it with a few questions throughout the presentation as well, just so I can stop and have a drink of water. But I'm genuinely interested in the thoughts of members of ACAMS all around the region. Just some acknowledgements. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and the leaders past, present and emerging. I do also want to acknowledge, much like Steve and all, around the impacts from COVID-19, but also the commitment from industry that certainly I've seen as a regulator, but also just as a professional, where people have recognised that there are impacts, there have been changes to the financial crime environment, there are challenges being able to communicate and engage with peers and counterparts, but despite all those challenges, what I've seen from ACAMS and the ACAMS membership is very much a commitment to continue to work together, to continue to support one another. I think the points that were outlined previously about continuing to operate virtual conferences are just one example of where that commitment has shown. And I just want to give credit to ACAMS and obviously its board, but also the members and those of you here today as well. Your individual commitment is quite inspirational, I would say, to me. The other acknowledgement is hopefully this will provide us some new insights, as I was talking about. It's not the same old presentation that the regulator has rolled out, so hopefully that you'll get something to take away today. Okay, the contents of the day, setting the scene. I'll just talk quickly about the financial crime environment, some compliance insights, some thoughts around addressing non-compliance. That's really perhaps some tips I can offer. I just want to talk a little bit about culture of compliance, and then I'm going to talk about what is AUSTRAC doing to help, what's on the horizon, and then sort of a bit of a wrap up at the end as well. So, setting the scene, the criminal operating environment. So, look, I won't talk too much about this because I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but certainly we have seen over the last 12 to 18 months evolving changes in the criminal threat environment. This is our operating environment that we all know and we all love sometimes. We've seen things such as the stockpiling of cash and the use of bulk cash transport, for example. That's arisen because of the limitations associated with cross-border movements. We know that here in Australia, for example, the challenges of being able to move in and out of the country. And with that, you've seen challenges of being able to move cash around as well. And so what we've seen also is law enforcement disruption through large cash seizures linked to criminal activities. This changed environment means that the online environment has become more pervasive. We've seen cyber-enabled crimes such as frauds and scams that have become more prevalent. We've also seen, sadly, the increase in online child sex exploitation and streaming of live child sex exploitation products as well within the region. So this is where the operating environment changes, particularly from a pandemic, and criminals, they are adept and they'll change their way. We've also seen organised crime adapt where government programs have arisen or changed, particularly government stimulus programs in response to COVID-19. New opportunities for criminals to defraud the Commonwealth out of that and yourselves as taxpayers as well. But industry were quick to respond. It's one thing I do want to make note of, that even in the start of the pandemic, when we all started to work from home, many of you and many of your seniors were very clear that financial crime compliance was remaining a priority during this time. And you sought our advice, and hopefully we assisted you with that, and we provided you some insights and some exploitation by criminals, and you responded very quickly on that. And I just want to give you, a pat on the back for the whole sector to responding so quickly. And what we saw that through an increase in relevant suspicious matter reports being reported to us and being able to refer them on through actionable intelligence to partner agencies as well. Some of the areas or the threat crime risk areas that we're involved in at the moment, trade-based money laundering obviously continues to be a complex method of laundering money involving diverse industries and products. Illegal wildlife trafficking, which has domestic and global considerations, and I know it's something that ACAMS have talked about previously. Together with the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment, AUSTRAC recently published a detailed financial crime guide on methodologies and indicators. So if you haven't seen that, it should be on our website, able to download. Fraud, so continuing on with the fraud, particularly Commonwealth programs such as the National Disability Insurance Agency, exploitation, and working with them, we've published a detailed financial crime guide as well. We've also detailed a financial crime guide detailing methods and financial indicators around child sex exploitation and abuse. So please hop on our website and download those or have a review of those if you haven't already. So that's the financial crime threat environment. It's continuing to evolve and change, and we need to continue to evolve and change with it. But part of that is making sure that we continue to build and improve our own compliance and our culture of compliance, which I'll talk about very shortly. But before I get to that, I want to talk about some of the challenges that AusTrack has seen within the industry. In particular, some of the compliance challenges that I say that I've seen. And I want to share these with you, not as a regulator, not to beat you with the stick. This is actually a carrot. I want to share these insights with you so they're at the forefront of your thinking when you're working in your organisations and you can see potential compliance issues. Here are some of the things that we're seeing. So this is really about what we can share with you. So, bit of a list there, and I'll just run through these in particular. So, risk. Risk continues to be one of those things where we're seeing various maturity across the financial sector, between small, medium and large entities across different types of sectors. It does vary. And so what I want to just draw out is a couple of points around assessing risk that might be relevant to you today. So we all know that the importance of identifying risks, it's the basis of the AML program, identifying, understanding and mitigating those risks. It's important that we also recognise that not one size fits all. It needs to be relevant and tailored to your business. Occasionally we do see the template risk analysis being undertaken. That's not suitable. We really do need to make sure that the risks are tailored to the business as well. In particular, things we've seen, knowing your customer, assessing the risk of your customer. Do you understand the customer? Do you understand their risks? And how do you develop your understanding of risk as well? Certainly, knowing your customer is one of the primary objectives of the Australian legislation, the AML-CDF Act. If you don't know your customer risk, how can you mitigate it or manage it or eliminate it? To give you some examples of things we've seen, customers that have been treated the same because of their employer. So a particular customer cohort all have the same employer, and so they're all risk rated the same. That's not quite how it works, I don't think, from where we sit. It's important to look at each customer individually. In circumstances of where third-party databases are being used for identification purposes and verification purposes, and that's being considered as a risk analysis. That's not really risk, that's just customer verification, identification. Other examples include customer information not being documented in systems or being in disparate systems and not coming together in a central place. So there's some sample examples I just want to draw out, and it's important to continue to think about customer risk in that lens. I do want to probably just draw out one particular one is also PEPs, politically exposed persons. It's one thing that we continue to see some disparity around PEPs, where we're seeing some sectors that they don't report undertaking PEP checks, and in quite large numbers. So some sectors are saying up to a quarter of those entities are not actually looking for PEPs at all, and that's quite concerning for us. So again, think about the customer and the risk of the customer, and ensure you're identifying the risk and understanding. Adapting to risk. Obviously, I've just talked about the financial crime threat environment and how that's changed in particular over the last 18 months. Look, the one point I'm going to take away with that is, industry and reporting entities often see the risks in some respects before AusTrack does. Your staff, your systems will identify new and unusual behaviour perhaps before we will. So I suppose my point is, don't wait for AusTrack to tell you of a shiny new risk. Make sure if you see something, then you respond to it, develop, understand it and mitigate it, and always submit SMR to AusTrack as well. I just want to talk quickly about resourcing, and I'm sure many of you will probably, no doubt, have a view on this. We recognise that in the Australian context, resourcing is a bit of a challenge. I know there's a bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul across the country. I do hear from everyone that we're talking to that it's a struggle to get people, particularly AML experts, and I know people are looking offshore to try and get it as well. We do understand that. And we recognise that will always be a challenge. We're in the same space. AusTrack, we're trying to recruit and we're competing with industry, and we're unfortunately we'll never be able to pay the same as industry. So I think that's just something to be conscious of and factor in terms of your business and your prioritisation of your business as well. But it's something that we do understand, and I just want to draw that out. A couple other points I just want to make there as well is one issue that's kind of come to our radar is around key people having perhaps too many responsibilities. So, for example, the MLRO, the responsible compliance officer, we have seen circumstances where the money laundering compliance officer perhaps is carrying quite a workload burden, and it's not just anti-money laundering responsibilities, and maybe several other different business responsibilities across the organisation. Now, we understand that in some circumstances that's the only option, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises where you operate a small business. But on some, we do see it in some other larger institutions as well. And I just want to call that out to make sure that the resourcing is adequate and MLROs are not being overwhelmed by other responsibilities. That's where risk does emerge, that things will fall through the cracks and entities will drop the ball. So I just want to draw that point out about it. Systems, everyone knows systems can be a challenge. AusTrack knows that. Something again to be conscious of around changing of systems, old systems that perhaps are not fit for purpose. So this is ICT systems. And data lineage. I know many across industry have been undertaking data lineage projects to understand where the data comes in and where it ends up. Just something to keep in mind in understanding where your data comes in. Are you getting all the right data, and are you reporting what you need to AusTrack as well? Competitive tension. Look, I don't raise this lightly. This is the point in my head where does anti-money laundering responsibilities balance with competitive tension of industry making a profit, which is what it's there for. There are some circumstances where I think AusTrack have been concerned that profit has been at the expense of adequate money laundering resourcing and adequate money laundering controls. I just want to highlight that and put that in people's minds. I mean, this point does go to culture and culture of organisations, and it's important to understand that the AML-CDF Act and the regulations around it are not there just for the sake of government to get in the way of industry. They are there about protecting the community, which I'm sure all of you know and understand about that. So just something to keep in mind around that competitive tension. Healthy tension is good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there should be no tension. There is always a healthy tension, but sometimes it can go out of balance. Assurance, look, I'll come back to this, but I can't stress it enough. This is one of the areas where entities are let down. One of the biggest issues that entities let themselves down, which is around, have you fixed something? If so, how do you know it's fixed? How do you assure yourself that you've fixed that, for example? But I'll come back to that. General capability. Certainly, we've seen obviously some in the small, medium enterprise businesses. It can be a challenge. This goes back to recruiting the right people and having the resources. Challenge with capability, knowledge, expertise. We do see it in some of the smaller sectors as well. And I'll talk about what AusTrack's trying to do, but I'm going to put this out there to all the members, is that we also should be trying to help one another, I think. Not as competitive businesses, but as financial crime compliance professionals and as people that want to make sure that our own communities are safe and protected as well. I'll put it to you that we should all be trying to share and help one another, and you know, this goes back to the ACAMS mission as well. So just a high level point. Two more points, and then I'll move on. Implementation of your AML program. So just a quick one. You can have the best AML program in the world. It can be documented and everything can be great in writing, but if it's not implemented properly, then you're going to end up with problems. And we have seen that in several occasions where the program is largely compliant, but the implementation is not. And that's where the case of the program's not being adhered to, or the policies or procedures are not being adhered to. And the last point is complexity, and that's kind of a question mark about a lot that we see not all of it, but a lot of it also ties back to complexity in some of the organisations. Complexity where various different moving parts add different layers and different areas of responsibility, and that's where sometimes entities can find themselves in a non-compliant environment as well. So from there, I believe I have a question. What is the key compliance challenge you're seeing? So I'm genuinely interested in seeing what you may be seeing as well. Now this should pop up through Slido, all going well. So I ask you to put in some views that you may have, obviously anonymise it from your own perspective. But I am generally interested in what compliance challenges that you may be seeing out in industry. Culture. Legacy systems, that's something, yes. You know, I suspect some of these points that will come through will be very consistent with what AusTrack is seeing as well. Says a lot, the systems are a big one. Resources, obviously, as well, staff shortages, data quality. Management commitment. That's, I think that's a point that you can draw out from a cultural perspective. Too much to do, too many disparate systems. But this all seems very consistent with what we're hearing as well. And obviously you're at the coalface that you're seeing it. Understanding obligations, yes, I can understand that as well. Look, very much all the points there, very consistent. And I don't think any surprise from where we sit as well. So I think for me, that's just good to get a sense of make sure that we're understanding the same things as what industry are understanding as well. So we might continue on. Thank you with that. Culture of compliance is what I was going to talk about next. And so I think, sorry, I might have missed a slide here. Here we are, addressing non-compliance. So one thing I just want to talk about very, very quickly is addressing non-compliance. And this is really a question that I'm posing to yourselves around what is your capability to remediate and how are you engaging with the regulator? And I say that from the perspective of we deal with several, we have been dealing with a number of entities where they've come to us, they've identified some compliance issues, and we've worked with them on that. But there has been questions in my head around the capability of some of these entities to remediate. And the other facet is how do they communicate that to the regulator? So this is really a little bit of tips and tricks. So, many of you experienced this at some point, I'd imagine, that an issue requires remediation. And what I want to draw out is understanding how bad it is and can you remediate it. So we've seen examples of entities not really unpacking the compliance issue that's arisen, and that's led to more problems later on. So I suppose my advice is it's best to unpack it all in one hit rather than keep coming back to AUSTRAC with new issues when they arise later. This is linked into assurance. So if you identify a compliance issue, I would ask you to explore further. Is it just one compliance issue or is this a range of interconnected issues as well? And the other facet to that is, do you have a critical analysis of your own business capability? Do you have the ability to remediate it yourselves, or do you need expertise or systems or other capacity to remediate the issue? And this is where you may need to draw on third-party expertise, for example, or you may need to spend a bit of extra money on resourcing the recruit as well. I think that's a point that, from the regulator, it's that critical analysis that, yes, you can do this or can't do this. And that for us, that's about where we may not have confidence, I suppose, in the entity. And sometimes we do suggest that other ways or means or using third-party support is required. The other point I just want to make is engagement and communication with the regulator. When you're engaging with the regulator, facts, not PR, please. Look, we just want to make sure the information we receive is timely, relevant, accurate, with clearly articulated plans with dates and accountabilities, which give us confidence. and make sure it's tailored to your audience, i.e. the regulator. So don't overcook it, don't undercook it, a straight batch approach, and don't assume knowledge as well. We deal with 16,000 plus entities. Please don't assume that we know everything about every single entity. But I just want to stress that point. Please don't give us the PR spin. We do get it a bit. We understand we don't need it. We just want to know the facts and the issues. Quick question I'll pop in there again for Slido, which is, what are the challenges to see when you're remediating? Again, this is one of these things that I like to draw from and learn lessons from. So this is me drawing from you as much as sharing amongst one another. Resourcing, budget, systems, lack of root cause analysis. Really good point. Really good point. Just to draw out that one, lack of root cause analysis. So I think that's the key point, is making sure you understand the root cause. Understanding, same thing again. Issues not fully scoped, band-aid approach solution. All really good points there. Streams not integrated, reactive versus proactive. This is great to hear that. It's great in one lens, in terms of it's great to hear the challenges that the industry are facing, so we can think about that more from our side of the house. But it is a shame that we are seeing these things as well. Fantastic, thank you. We'll head on to the next slide. I'm very conscious of time. I'm chewing a lot up here, but I thought it'd be worthwhile talking about some of the insights. So if we can go back to the slides, please. Thank you. Culture of compliance. So look, I'll go over this. This is probably the last thing that I'll go into depth, and then I'll whip through the others very, very quickly. One of the things that is critically important from where I sit is ensuring that the culture of an organisation supports the compliance. You may have seen today that the CEO Nicole Rose, CEO of AUSTRAC Nicole Rose, there's an article in the AFR where she mentioned culture of compliance as well. Funnily enough, it wasn't aligned with our talking points, but I do want to stress that. It's important that culture is reflected on. Culture is the basis of everything, I think, from where I sit. I mean, I sit in AUSTRAC as the regulator, and within even my own function, I've influenced and changed culture to be more proactive with our work, to provide more advice to industry, to continue to improve our supervision work. And that's a cultural uplift that I've been working on. It's the same thing in industry as well. And there are very good examples of positive culture in the private sector, where we've seen strong leadership coming up and mandating clear priorities around financial crime compliance, for example. But there are other things as well I would offer you in terms of how do you deliver a culture of compliance, or a positive financial crime compliance culture. Governance, accountability and assurance. We've seen this time and time again. We've seen it in AUSTRAC enforcement actions. We've seen it in industry programs. We've seen it in government programs where governance has not worked or has been poor. There's been no accountability and there's been no assurance as well. And what happens? Things fall over, errors arise, problems end up occurring. So what do I, just to unpack those three, what do I mean by governance, accountability and assurance? So governance, systems, processes and policies that ensure appropriate decision making. Accountability, responsibility for making decisions and accepting the consequences, whether they be good or bad. And assurance, the confidence and the confirmation that you've done what you need to. I mean, there are so many examples I could rattle off. We've seen them in government several times around issues of where governance have let them down. So what are the points? Senior management and boards need to be fully engaged, and not just waiting for information to be presented, but proactively engaging on the risks. You need to have that senior buy-in as well on that, and training of senior management. Now, I understand that can be a challenge perhaps with some of the practitioners here today, but I think in some respects, as a cohort, particularly the ACAMS cohort, you have an opportunity to influence. You have an opportunity to inform across all your different organisations and demonstrate that culture of compliance. Accountability, again, I won't go on that much more, but making sure that the reporting lines are clear, roles and responsibilities are understood and communicated clearly as well, and who has ultimate accountability for decisions. And assurance, look, if you change something, or you fix something, or you put something new in, assure yourself that you haven't broken anything. So many times a problem will come up where policies are not aligning with the program, documentation not accurate or fulsome, a coding error or system change. These are simple examples, but they continue to occur. A change in a piece of technology leads to a failure somewhere else, whether that be regular reporting or monitoring of financial transactions or whatever it may be. Assurance processes must be embedded to guard against unintended disruptions to downstream processes. And with these points, don't rely on the regulator to be the fourth line of defence. That's not our role, unfortunately. Governance is not set and forget, so please continue to monitor and understand and continue to improve your governance. Implementation is just as good as the framework, which is the point that I was raising before in relation to that. So some points I just want to share with you in relation to that. Those things together will help you build and improve and maintain a positive culture of compliance. So I think this might be one last question, I think it is. I'm very conscious of time, sorry, Orb, I'm going over time, I think. But last question in Slido, how does your business build its AML culture? I'm absolutely intrigued to understand what are the ways that you see culture in your organisation, or even some of the challenges you may see to culture in your organisation as well. Training, tone from the top. Strong leadership, sharing knowledge, hiring from Hong Kong. Analytics insights. I think the tone from the top is absolutely one of the things that I see. Senior management buy-in and strong leadership is an important part of it. Involving everyone. I think that's another part as well. Is how do you make sure you're undertaking contextualised decision making? Is everyone that needs to be involved in a decision or has contributed to a decision or been consulted, for example? Training is one point. Training is one point, I think, but it's the behaviours that come from training. So you can have as much training as you want, but as long as you're then taking on that training and exhibiting the necessary behaviours, then I think that's where some of that will come from. Share beyond key teams, agreed. Again, so very similar sort of thinking, I'd imagine, across industry and what we see. So we might head back to the slides if we can. Thank you. So what's AusTrack doing to help? This is the PR exercise now from AusTrack. Risk assessments. So as many of you know, we've been undertaking a series of risk assessments to hopefully help with industry understand their risks. These risk assessments, as many of you know, are being developed in collaboration with industry and drawing on industry knowledge, not just AusTrack coming down from the mountain with our 10 commandments per se. So I just want to give a shout out to those that are helping us with those risk assessments. Your insights are critical and valuable to the work that we do, and that allows us to share across the broader sector as well, so everyone gets the benefit of that knowledge. So at the moment, we've got 8 risk assessment reports underway for release either in this year or next year, and that includes the major domestic banks, other domestic banks, foreign subsidiary banks, foreign bank branches, remittance network providers and their affiliates, independent remittance providers, and casinos as well, Australian casinos. So we've got some really meaty risk assessments that are scheduled to come out. I know I've been reviewing some that have come through me, and they are, I say, meaty and very comprehensive documents. So looking forward to getting them out sooner rather than later. In relation to guidance, just to touch on some points around guidance, some of the recent guidance materials are on our website. Please go to our website. That's where it all is. Guidance to support reporting entities when providing banking services to customers experiencing family and domestic violence, for example. Know your customer requirements during COVID-19, as many of you drew on. I think we're working with some of the industry associations as part of that. Guidance to enable reporting entities to assess their money laundering and terrorism financing risks. New guidance resources from the written sector last year as well. We've issued some recent information around suspicious matter reporting and helping provide continued updated information to help with suspicious matter reporting. Implemented an induction program to assist new reporting entities that enrol and register with AUSTRAC each month, but they're really targeted to probably the smaller entities. And as many of you know, you may be aware that we've got our AusTrack in brief, which we send out, I'm trying to remember, each quarter I think it is, which is our means of communicating recent activity. And so if you go to the website, you can join that and get emailed our newsletter, if you want to call it that. And as part of that, we provided some new guidance materials on customer identification procedures and other things as well. And obviously there's some information released last week in relation to the latest legislative reforms as well. So what else is on the horizon? Very quickly, as I said last week, legislative reforms commenced on the 17th of June, amendments around CDD and reliance as well, and correspondent banking. I won't go into huge amounts of details on that, as I'm sure many of you are aware of it. Otherwise, there's guidance and information on our website. Other things on the horizon, many of you know we've been doing some work with around IFTI reporting. We understand the complexities that arise in relation to the international transaction work, reporting for us, and so we have got that working group and working with industry to hopefully come and provide some updated guidance and information. We're working on an e-learning package that will provide a foundation understanding for AML CDF obligations for industry. So watch the scenes on that. The other thing I just want to make a point of, systems. So I know your point about systems. Many of you have dealt with our systems, which are ageing, is dare I say it. You may be aware that the last budget, or the 2020-21 federal budget, we received additional funding, which is going to deliver major upgrades to our industry-facing technology and communication systems, which means we're going to have a much more U-Butte portal for industry to engage us with, rather than the existing system as well. Okay, last points that I will point out, some tips and takeaways and expectations. So this is just the wrap up. Think about how you communicate with the regulator. So I talked about that before. Again, facts, not PR. Accuracy, relevance, timeliness, making sure you don't assume knowledge. And the point on that is I'm stressing is because we receive information from entities, we take that information to heart. And so if there's something in there that to a third party observer goes, that's a bit alarming, then we'll be alarmed at that as well. So, but then we unpack and we go, actually, we don't need to be concerned about it. So just think about how you're communicating with us. Remediation, truly challenging yourself, really unpacking. Is this just one issue? If you see a problem, do you need to look further? Does your organisation have the ability to remediate? Do you need help? Just points out there to think about. Assurance, location. I can't stress this enough. This is one of the things, if you get assurance right, will help you a lot when there are failures that occur in your organisation. So think about assurance in terms of your business processes. And the last point, culture is king. And the other point I want to link to this is we talked about culture and some of the things. Remember why we are doing this. Go back to the third slide where I talked about the financial crime threat environment. We're here doing this work. We're here at ACAMS, talking to our peers and one another. not because it's just a job, but for me, and this is what I get a sense of, is that we're all true believers. We're all true believers in the mission of financial crime compliance. I know, all read out my very long-winded introduction or bio at the start, and I've worked in national security and law enforcement for coming up 15 years soon. This is probably the role where I've felt I'm delivering the most tangible benefit to the community out of all the work that I've done in the past. And, I like to think of myself as a true believer, and I know many of you that I interact with on a day-to-day basis are also true believers in the mission. It's not about just compliance for the sake of compliance. It is about protecting your family, my family, our friends, our community as well. So that's the other facet of culture, is always link back, why am I doing this? Why are we doing this? Now, I think I've filled up all my time allotment. Sorry, all, my apologies. But thank you. Look, I hope you've taken something out of that today. Please, I hope you enjoy yourself virtually or physically in presence in Sydney today. Again, I'm sorry I can't be there. I was looking forward to meeting many of you that I hadn't met before and catching up with others. But thank you. And I think if we've got time for questions, I'm happy to take some questions.
Nathan, you don't think you're going to get away that quickly? And I've been trying to work out, given your doctorate was on wastewater, how do I link that with money laundering? I'll find the link there somewhere, I'm quite sure. Now, look, we could go for another half hour. There's some brilliant questions,
Absolutely.
but you've answered some of them. Some came in early and you answered those, so forgive me if I don't bring them all up. But there's a couple there that I'd like to bring up. What measures is AUSTRAC taking to encourage collaboration in areas that could be more effectively tackled collectively, like transaction monitoring? Do you have a view on that?
Look, I think part of the work, this is where it's hard. I mean, obviously we have the Fintel Alliance, where there's aspect of the Fintel Alliance that are information generated out of the Fintel Alliance is then published and shared more broadly. Where there's opportunities for collaboration on things like transaction monitoring, I'd say that don't necessarily expect the regulator to come and step in and say, all right, everyone needs to collaborate. I think forums like this, for example, are an opportunity to start to build that collaboration if there's areas to improve on transaction monitoring. And I say that from the perspective, I know transaction monitoring is increasingly complex. I mean, you're dealing with old criminal or traditional criminal activity, and you're dealing with the new stuff as well. Look, there's probably nothing specific, but it's an interesting question, and I will take that away and have a conversation with some of my peers, and particularly understand, is there something we can communicate or even generate insights that might be useful for the sector as well to understand, well, what are various parties doing in relation to transaction monitoring? What does it look like, and how do we improve? So, sorry, it probably doesn't really answer the question, but I'll let me take it on notice.
Thanks, Nathan. And in fact, we've got a session which I'm moderating tomorrow, and one of the key points out of that is utilities and where do they fit in. So maybe we can carry that further.
Yeah.
Many entities have operations outside Australia and are subject to other jurisdictions' regulations. What are some of the best practice observations that AusTrack has in entities with global AML CTF programs?
Transparency would be the first one. So obviously it's important that entities are transparent with all the relevant regulators, I would say. And look, let me just find, I've got some points in front of me about what does positive practices that give AusTrack comfort look like. This applies whether it's domestic or international. And I think part of it is evidence that boards are oversighting the program, which I talked about, and that's, again, we deal with these organisations that are international, and we engage on an international scale. We don't just engage Australia. Only last week I was having conversations with the Central Bank of Ireland, for example. So don't think that we're just focusing domestically as well. So sorry, positive practices, boards, resourcing is appropriate. Staff can clearly articulate the risks they face and control environment they have implemented. Regular audits and reviews, risk assessments that are up to date, well-trained staff, and that's not just 10 multiple choice questions annually, but appropriate training, timely reporting, good data quality, and again, going back to the last point, open, transparent communication. And I think for us, where there is that international linkages. We will work with our partner regulators overseas where we can, but I think those points that I've just outlined there, they're consistent whether they're Australia or overseas, I would say.
Can I just extend that 1 second more, because it's my understanding, and in fact I know this is a fact, that you are now working with the supervisors in New Zealand and doing joint assessments where the entity is in both countries. That would be a concept I would think that you could take further to answer the question that we've just come through.
Absolutely, and I think the other point, prior to the pandemic, we were also going overseas doing assessments on international or international components of the domestic arms as well. So hopefully we'll get back to that one day. But yes, we did some recent work with our New Zealand counterparts, and there's obviously other work we're doing with some of the domestic regulators here and other international regulators that are coming up as well. So that's another facet. Absolutely. Thanks all.
Right. Look, we have really run out of time. I'm getting all sorts of messages here on the screen that I've got to get off the stage. But there's one there that I'd just like to finish on. And it says, with the AusTrack online upgrades, will they remove the lovely lilac and mint green colour scheme?
I'm not sure about that one, but let me take that away. I'll make that. I suppose the question I'm not sure is do they want to keep the lovely lilac and mint colour scheme, or do they want to get rid of the existing
We'll do
scheme?
a poll during the 2 days and come back with a collective answer.
That would be great.
Ladies and gentlemen, look, we are out of time. I do apologise. I think when you've got an excellent speaker, presenter like Nathan, we could be here all morning and engage with him and walk away with a wealth of extra knowledge. We can't do that. We always run out of time. Would you please join me in thanking Nathan for an excellent presentation?
Thank you,
Nathan.
Thank you, everyone.